Grief is not a problem to solve. It's a human experience to move through, and most of us were never taught how. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, licensed psychologist and grief specialist. Welcome to Grief is the New Normal, where we change the conversation around loss one honest episode at a time. Let's get into it. Hey friends, welcome back to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and we are 2 episodes into our 6-part mini-series on common grief reactions, and today we're going straight into the fire. Last week we talked about the body, the chest tightness, the bone-deep exhaustion, the gut that won't settle. So if you missed it, go back. It's a good one. And today we're talking about the emotional side of grief. And I want to warn you right now, this is not going to be a neat, tidy conversation because the emotional landscape of grief is not neat or tidy. It is loud, contradictory, unpredictable, and sometimes genuinely shocking, even to the person experiencing it. So if you've been crying at a dog food commercial and then laughing about the fact that you're crying at a dog food commercial, snapping at your partner for breathing slightly too loud, feeling rage, then guilt, then numbness, then a weird moment of peace, all before lunch, or waiting for the quote unquote real feelings to arrive because you're not feeling much of anything, and that's scaring you just as much. I need you to know something. You are not losing your mind. You are grieving. And so here's what we're going to cover today: why grief emotions are supposed to feel like chaos, the myth of quote unquote appropriate emotional responses to loss, the taboo feelings nobody wants to admit they're having and why they make complete sense, why some feelings show up late, sideways, or not at all, and how to just ride the emotional waves without getting pulled under. So let's get into it. Okay, I want to start by blowing up a myth. Somewhere along the way, we got this idea that grief is synonymous with sadness, that if you're grieving, you should be crying. Quiet, soft, wearing dark colors, and speaking in hushed tones. And here's the thing: sadness absolutely belongs in grief, but it is not the whole story. Not even close. Grief is not an emotion, it's a container for all your emotions. And depending on the day, the hour, or the moment, that container might be holding sadness or rage, relief, guilt, anxiety, confusion, longing, bitterness, numbness, moments of genuine joy or laughter that make you feel like you're somehow betraying your own grief. Yes, all of that is grief, every single bit of it. Here's a metaphor I keep coming back to. Grief is less like a river flowing in one direction, predictable, containable, and it's more like the ocean during a storm. Multiple waves from multiple directions hitting at different intensities at completely unpredictable intervals. You're not swimming laps in the local pool. You're treading water and occasionally getting knocked sideways. And the research backs this up. George Bonanno's work on bereavement has shown consistently that the emotional experience of grief is far more variable than our cultural script suggests. There is no universal emotional trajectory. There are no feelings you're supposed to have on a schedule. So if your grief doesn't look like what you expected or what others have expected, that is not a problem with your grief. That is just how your grief is working. Okay, I'm going to describe something I hear from almost every grieving person I work with, usually with some embarrassment. They'll say something like, I was sobbing in the car on the way to work, and then 20 minutes later, my coworker made a joke, and I genuinely laughed, like really laughed. And then I felt terrible about it. Or I had a really good day, like a genuinely good day. And then I got home and I felt so guilty, I almost couldn't breathe. Can we talk about this? Because the guilt that comes with joy during grief is one of the most painful and least talked about parts of the whole experience. And here's what I want you to understand. Feeling joy or lightness or humor in the middle of grief is not a sign that you've forgotten. It is not betrayal. It is not disrespectful to the person you lost. It is your nervous system doing something incredibly adaptive, giving you a moment to breathe so you can keep going. Grief is tidal. It comes in waves. It pulls back, it returns. Sometimes the wave is a tsunami, sometimes it's a gentle swell. And the pulling back, the laughter, the good afternoon, the moment when you forgot for just a second, that is not failure. That is just the tide going out. I talk about this model all the time with my clients and in my grief talks. Stroebe and Schut's dual process model of bereavement describes this so beautifully. It's learning how to oscillate between loss-oriented work, where you're fully in the pain of grief, and restoration orientation, where you're stepping away from it to do the business of living. Both are necessary. Neither cancels the other out. The movement between them, that whiplash you feel, is actually healthy, adaptive grieving. I think about it all the time, like my grandma's old white kitchen fan. It's oscillating between these two spaces. And sometimes you're in one longer than the other. Sometimes you're swapping back and forth between them rapidly. That's all normal. That's what we're supposed to do. And I think that's where I struggle with some of the linear models of our past. It's like they're moving to this endpoint. And I think this model demonstrates that to work towards grief integration or adaptive grief, it's learning how to integrate our losses into our stories by finding that balance between the oscillation between those two spaces. So the next time you laugh at something and then feel guilty for it, I want you to hear my voice in your head. That's just the tide going out, and I can let it. So, another thing that doesn't get talked about often enough, what happens when you feel nothing? Or when you're so composed that everyone keeps telling you how strong you are and you smile and nod, but inside you're aware that you're white knuckling your way through every single day and you have no idea what's underneath it. Or when it's been 6 months or a year or even 3 years and suddenly you're undone by a smell or a song or the way the light looks on a Tuesday afternoon, and the grief that wasn't there before is suddenly everywhere. None of this is dysfunction. None of this is delayed grief becoming a problem. This is your psyche doing what it does, protecting you until you have the capacity to feel what you couldn't feel when you were in survival mode. I think often we forget capacity and time are resources, and we don't always have that as an abundant resource in order to fall apart. And so our bodies can sometimes protect us and insulate us from feeling that until we have a space-time capacity resources to fall apart. In the aftermath of loss, many people are in that full logistics mode. There's a funeral to plan, family to coordinate, paperwork decisions, an inbox full of condolences to respond to, all of the sadmin. The emotional body often goes quiet during all of that, not because grief isn't there, but because the system is smart enough to know this is not the moment. And then 6 months later, when the world has moved on, when people have stopped checking in, casseroles are a distant memory, and everyone assumes you're quote unquote better, that's often when the real weight of it arrives. That's when the reality of the loss is really setting in, that this is my new normal. And those griefy feelings are that we didn't have capacity for earlier on, they're still there, and now they're coming up. There is no deadline on grief emotions or expiration dates on sadness or statute of limitations. If your feelings are arriving late or sideways or in pieces, that's not you failing to grieve correctly. That's just how grief moves. Okay, story time with Heather. So this is a personal story about me. I actually don't think I've ever shared this piece. So we're going to go with it. I lost my brother in 2009. I got my heart failure diagnosis in 2021. Well, something that I had got in my head after Garrett died was I wanted to run a marathon. I wanted to run a marathon. I had been a runner in high school, and that had been such a positive outlet for me. And so I remember starting to train. I needed a focus. I needed a way to metabolize out everything that I was feeling in my body. So I got up to about 12 miles, and then I tweaked my knee really bad because I played basketball for a number of years and I have bad knees. So I tweaked my knee and then kind of hopped off of that running train for a really long time. So fast forward, quite a few years, and I get my heart failure diagnosis, and I am terrified of dying. Terrified. My ejection fraction was at 10%. We were talking heart transplant actively. I'm on a ton of medications. I'm 5 years still in heart failure, but I'm stable, and we're not talking heart transplant yet. That's still, but anyways, I digress. I digress. So something I really wanted to do is prove that I was still strong. I felt so weak after carrying my daughter through COVID and then coming out of that diagnosis and the recovery and trying to earn back my ejection fraction. It took me almost an entire year to get cleared to exercise again. And I was just really grieving the strength that I felt, that capability that I felt in my body. And so I decided to sign up for a half marathon. So it's like January 2022. I signed up for the Mother's Day half marathon in Kirkland, Washington. And I was going to do it. And I started training and building up miles, building up stamina. And the day comes, and I'm so nervous that my heart's going to give out while I'm running, or I'm not going to be able to finish, and I'm going to disappoint my family. And it's Mother's Day. There was a lot of emotions tied up in the day. And I'm going along. I'm about the halfway mark, and I see my folks. Ooh, I'm gonna like get teary. So I see my folks down the way, and have my son, and he's like cheering me on so loud. I just instantly start crying. I'm just so touched that like he gets to see me strong, and that was a step in really recognizing how much grief I felt about my body. Being in that heart failure space with my lack of energy and fear I'm not going to see him graduate or grow up or any of these things. And so to get him seeing me be strong was so powerful for me. And it spawned this delayed grief reaction that I didn't even know I needed to have. It was a lot of unprocessed grief emotions around my diagnosis and how much strength has been a part of my story. I've always been a competitive athlete, have been able to work out and keep up and feel strong and capable in my body. And that diagnosis really robbed me of feeling strong. And so by doing this race, it felt like I was reclaiming some of my strength and rebuilding trust with my body and grieving that things just look different now. And that doesn't make me less than. And then I get to the end of the race because I made it. I did finish. My goals were to finish and to not be last. And I achieved both of those things. Now, was I almost last? Yes, but I wasn't last. I feel like I hit that goal. But anyways, I just at like running in, I just start bawling and just crying, and all of this grief and fear is like oozing out of me, and I'm basically verbally processing it kind of the whole rest of the day, the rest of the week. But I go back to that emotional release. It needed to come out somewhere, and movement was helpful in me creating space for that emotional release and for those feelings to have a place to go and to feel like I finally had capacity and safety to process them. Because it's like, no, I am strong. I am still strong, and I can be sad and grieve this diagnosis and the limitations, and I'm still strong. And that, I don't know. That's the story that came up when I was thinking about talking about grief and feelings. So there we go. All right. Moving on, before I get too rambly, I want to talk about the feelings nobody puts in a sympathy card, right? Because here's another truth about grief. It doesn't only come wrapped up in clean, legible sadness. Sometimes it comes in the form of feeling shameful, confusing, or socially unacceptable. And those are often feelings that do the most damage when they don't get acknowledged. So let's name some of them. Let's start with relief. I'm glad they're not suffering anymore. I'm glad I don't have to be the caretaker anymore. I'm glad that relationship is over. Relief and grief can absolutely coexist. Relief does not cancel love. It does not make you a bad person. Often it means you watch someone suffer and you love them enough to not want that for them. Or it means the relationship was complicated and you're allowed to feel the release of that weight. Number 2, anger. I'm furious at them for leaving. I'm angry at the doctors. I'm angry at God. I'm angry at myself. Anger is one of the most common grief emotions and one of the most suppressed, especially in cultures where grief is expected to look soft. I grew up in a more conservative culture, and I grew up thinking that anger was a sin. And Took a lot of years unpacking all of that. And I had this really amazing therapist who helped me really name the anger I had towards my brother. And it was so freeing because I still loved him. I still missed him. And I was really angry at some of the choices that he made. And I was angry that he wasn't here. And that was one of the first times in my life that I really let myself be angry about something. Um, because again, anger had been this bad thing. And now I love anger. Anger is my friend, especially because it feels so. Number 3, guilt. Guilt is pervasive. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas. What if I just had guilt and grief almost always is always about the gap, this gap between what we did and what we wish we would have done, between the relationship as it was and the relationship we wished it had been. Ken Doka's work on disenfranchised grief reminds us that these feelings are especially pronounced when the relationship itself was complicated or wasn't socially sanctioned to begin with, or how they died is more typically taboo, like addiction or suicide. And so there can be these guilt related feelings, particularly under that disenfranchised grief umbrella. Number 4, numbness. Sometimes mistaken for not caring or not grieving enough, but numbness is not absence. In some ways it's protection. It's your mind's equivalent of a circuit breaker. It trips when the emotional load is too high. My dad's an electrician. And it keeps you from complete overload. So numbness is grief. It's just quieter. And then number 5, joy. The flash of happiness that feels wrong the moment you notice it. The thing I said earlier, you can feel multiple things at once. You can miss your person and be relieved that they're gone. You can be devastated and still find something beautiful in your day. The Dougie Center's core principles include something I return to often. Grief is contextual. The feelings you have are not random. They're shaped by who you are, who this person was to you, what your relationship held, and what your history taught you feelings are for. There is no universal emotional script for loss, and anyone who tells you what you should or shouldn't be feeling hasn't done their homework. So, like, even all of the emotional talk we've been covering today, it is all taken with a grain of salt, right? Because your grief you experience is unique to you. And so, what emotions come up are going to be unique to you, your story, your relationship with your person. There's context and nuance in grief. So, what do we actually do with all of this emotional weather? I'm going to talk you through a few things, and I'm going to bring in 2 pieces of my stay framework here because they apply directly. The first is we're going to track our losses. When you're in the middle of an emotional wave and you don't know what you're even feeling or why, try to slow down and ask, what specifically have I lost here? Not just the person, but the role they played, the relationship you had, or the one you wanted and never got, the future you were expecting, the version of yourself that existed in relation to them. Sometimes the emotion seems irrational. The rage or guilt, the grief that kind of hits out of nowhere, makes complete sense when you track it back to a specific loss underneath it. I'm not crying about the song. I'm crying because that song was on the car the last time I felt like everything was going to be okay. Like for me, every time I hear the Cupid Shuffle, it makes me start crying. That's one of my favorite memories from my brother about a month before he died. He taught myself and a bunch of us cousins who were out for the night, he taught us the Cupid Shuffle, and we do it at all the family weddings. Like it's just, I mean, we were just even at a Viking fest a couple weeks ago in one of our communities, and they did street dancing, and it was lots of line dancing, and Cupid Shuffle came on, and every time I do it, I tear up. It just makes me think of him. So we're not crying about the song, we're crying because the song connects us to our person, right? And then the second part of the stay framework we're going to touch on a little bit is allowing for complexity. This one is big. The cultural message around grief is that we should be moving towards resolution, towards a clean emotional landing spot. But grief doesn't resolve that way. And trying to force it there often means we abandon the feelings that don't fit the narrative we think we're supposed to have. So allowing for complexity means you don't have to choose. You don't have to pick one feeling and call it the truth of your grief. You can hold the anger and the love, the relief and the devastation, the guilt and the understanding that you did the best you could with the tools and resources you had. Contradiction is not confusion. In grief, it's often accuracy. And here are a few practical anchors for writing right in those emotional ways, right? 1, We're going to name it without judging it. I am furious right now. I'm completely numb. I feel guilty and I don't know why. You don't have to explain it or fix it. Just let it have a name. Siegel's research on affect labeling shows that naming an emotion engages that prefrontal cortex and actually reduces the intensity of the emotional charge. So you're not being dramatic. Your brain is just doing what it needs to do. Number 2, giving yourself permission to be a walking contradiction. Okay, repeat after me. I can grieve and laugh. I can love someone and be angry at them. I can miss someone and feel relief that they're gone. All of it belongs. Number 3, we're going to move it through the body. Emotions are not just psychological. They are physiological. They live in your body. Crying, walking, screaming into a pillow, writing without editing, making noise. These are not indulgences. They are completion cycles. Let the wave, those griefy waves we were talking about, move through you rather than trying to stop it at the shoreline. All right, number 4, find your witnesses. Feelings need to be felt and they also need to be witnessed, not fixed, not rescued from, not explained away, not minimized with at least statements. Find the people in your life who can sit with you in the mess without needing to clean it up. And if you don't have those people, that's what therapy or grief coaching is for. That's what this community is for. All right, so before we close, let's land in this for a moment. Think about the past week. If you've been grieving anything, a death, a relationship, a diagnosis, a version of your life, a hope you had to let go of, I want you to ask yourself, what's one feeling I haven't let myself fully have yet? Maybe it's the anger that feels tricky. Maybe it's the relief that feels shameful. Maybe it's the sadness that you've been staying one step ahead of because you know if you stop, it's going to catch you. You don't have to dive into it right now, but I want you to just acknowledge that it's there. Say its name out loud or in your head. There's some anger in here. There's relief that I haven't known what to do with. There's a grief that hasn't had room yet. These are not weaknesses. This is grief literacy, and it matters. So here's what I want you to carry with you from today. Grief is not one feeling. It is a container for all of them. The pretty ones, the hard ones, the confusing ones, the ones nobody talks about at the funeral. And you are not too emotional. And if you're not feeling much, you are not failing at grief. You're surviving it on whatever timeline your nervous system has decided is safe. Your feelings don't need to make sense to anyone else. They don't need to be explained or justified. They need space and time and a little bit of compassion from the one person who has to live inside them, you. So, and if your emotions have been arriving late, sideways, or not at all, keep paying attention. They'll come when you're ready. And when they do, you'll know what to do with them a little better because of today, because of listening to this episode. So, your invitation for this week: name one feeling that you haven't given space to yet. Say it out loud. Write it down. Don't fix it. Just let it exist. That's the whole assignment. Be sure to come back next week for part 3. We're going into the cognitive and mental side of grief, why you can't concentrate, why your memory's shot, and why you walk into a room and forget why you're there, beyond just ADHD, and why none of that means anything is wrong with your brain. So remember to be kind to yourselves. We'll see you next time. Take care. That's a wrap on today's episode. If something landed for you, share it, because grief deserves more space in the world, not less. You can find show notes, resources, and more at thedrheathertaylor.com. And if no one has said it to you today, your grief is real, it matters, and you don't have to carry it alone. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.